This is May the 17th, 1975. The following is a revision on the genealogy of the Powers family. This was first written in 1967 and 1968, but there have been a number of changes since, so I feel it was necessary to revise it. Quite a bit of research has gone into this, and I also received the help from a number of people, especially Maud Sinnott, a cousin, Kate Jers, a cousin, the Columban Fathers in Omaha, Nebraska, and Calvary Cemetery. Through the Columban Fathers, I was able to obtain a history of the name Powers, also a family crest with the motto Per Crucem de Coronam. I believe in translation that means through the cross a crown. The origin of the name Powers began around 1690. The origination of the name was Della Poor. Through evolution, it was changed from Della Poor to Poor, P-A-U-E-R. Later, it became P-O-W-E-R. My grandfather, Anthony, who migrated to this country along with two brothers and two sisters, put an S on the name. From here on in, all reference will be to the word Powers. The family originated in a town called Cambody Mills Abbey, Campiel, County Wexford, Ireland. My great-grandfather's name was James Powers. He was a weaver. He married a Mary White. I believe my great-grandparents were born around 1800. This couple was blessed with 9 children that I know of, 6 of whom came to America. 3 stayed in Ireland. The 3 that stayed in Ireland were John, Paul, and Mary. The only thing I know about the 3 of them over there is that Mary married a McGrath. I believe my grandfather was the oldest of the family. The 6 who migrated to America all settled in Chicago. I don't believe they all came at the same time. My grandfather came to America in 1868. He settled in a section of Chicago on the north side called Goose Island. He arrived in Chicago approximately 4 years before the Chicago fire, which was in his neighborhood. I believe the fire was in October of 1872. My grandfather was born in 1835. The 2 brothers and 3 sisters who also came to this country are Joseph, Patrick, Ellen, Margaret, and Bridget. I don't know the sequence in which they came over or their ages, other than the fact that Bridget was the baby. In giving the descriptions on the rest of the family, I do not know their ages or the exact rotation in which they came over. However, I do know they all settled in Chicago. I will give the details on my grandfather's family first. Grandfather Anthony married a Bridget Powers, the same surname but no relation. I do believe they were married after they arrived in this country. I know nothing about my grandmother's side of the family. My grandfather was a laborer. My grandfather bought a building 2 stories with an apartment in front and back on each of the 2 floors. My grandfather lived with his family on the 2nd floor. The 1st floor was lived in by his brother Patrick. My grandparents had 7 children, only 3 of whom lived to adulthood. My grandfather bought 3 graves in Calvary Cemetery for the amount of $20 in 1876. The original deed to those graves is in my files. In those 3 graves there are a number of burials. Now there may be some confusion as to the names and ages and repetition of names, which means that my grandparents evidently allowed some cousins, nephews, or friends to occupy some of those graves. As of this date, there are 14 people buried in that 3-grave plot. Calvary has assured me there's still room for 1 more, which will finalize the 3-grave plot in Calvary. That 1 spot is being reserved for my sister Margaret. The following is a story of my dad, the oldest of the 3 children that lived to adulthood. My dad was born September the 3rd, 1878. He married my mother Hannah Reardon Powers. She was born July the 15th, 1882. My folks were married in Chicago. I believe it was September the 15th, 1904. My mother and dad were an ideal couple. While we were small children, my mother and dad never went out much. As we grew older, they made up for it, and wherever they went together. They were a very devoted couple without being demonstrative. My mother had a very dynamic personality. My folks had 7 children, of which I, Anthony, am the oldest. I was born August the 4th, 1905, at home. I was baptized in St. Veronica's Church on the north side of Chicago in a section called Avondale. My Aunt Maggie, who later became Sister Lucina, was my godmother, and my grandfather, my mother's dad, Michael Reardon, was my godfather. I married a Frances Weiler on June 30th, 1928. Frances was born November the 3rd, 1908. We were blessed with 4 children, of which Robert was the oldest. Bob was born September the 1st, 1929. Bob is married to a Dolores Stillwell. They live in Kalamazoo and have 4 fine children. The oldest of their children is Pamela, who is now married and lives in Colorado. She married a Michael Early. Pamela is their only girl. Next in line is Terry. Terry is a big boy who is quite a star in football, and I believe he's in college now. Next came Robin. Robin was a very studious boy, a very fine boy. Their baby is Brian. Brian is quite an artistic boy. The next of my children was Terry, named after my brother, Father Terence. Terry was born May the 18th, 1931. Terry married a Phyllis Fink. They've been blessed with two fine daughters, Julie and Susan. These are two quite beautiful, talented girls. They live in a condominium in a suburb of Chicago called Bowling Brook. Our next child was a daughter, Antoinette. Tony was born January the 10th, 1933. Tony graduated from Quincy College, taught school in the Chicago area for a number of years. Tony married Tom Collins, who went in business for himself about a year ago, representing a number of companies selling railroad supplies. They live in St. Paul, Minnesota. Tony, as a teacher, is now called the Picture Lady in St. Paul. She teaches children in elementary schools the appreciation of good art. Our second daughter is Frances Murray. Murray was born July 21st, 1934. She also graduated from Quincy College and, along with Tony, taught school in the Chicago area for several years. Murray married a Bud Donovan. Bud Donovan is my wife Babe's nephew and Ann Schwenke Donovan's son. Murray and Bud are cousins by marriage but no blood relation. They live in Monroe, Wisconsin. Bud is in the cheese business with his dad, managing the cheese company for Dorman and Company. They have 5 fine children. There's Michael, Molly, Kevin, Nancy, and Peggy. Murray still does some substitute teaching in Monroe. Frances, their mother, died on a Christmas Eve, 1938. At that time, Bob was only 9 years old. Murray was 4. Frances died from lobar pneumonia. On July 27, 1940, I remarried. I married a Bernadine Schwenke. Everyone knows her as Babe. Babe was born May the 20th, 1910. I have always felt very fortunate and grateful in having Babe marry me and help the way she has done in raising those 4 children. She has done a fantastic job. I do believe those children have as much love for Babe as it's possible for them to have. Babe and I were blessed with 1 child, Anthony Richard Jr. Dick. Dick was born June the 14th, 1942. Dick also graduated from Quincy College, and he too is a school teacher, although he specializes as a teacher in science. Dick received a master's degree in geology from Notre Dame in 1974. Dick is married to a Pat Donovan, no relation to the other Donovan family. She too graduated from Quincy and is also a school teacher. Dick and Pat have no children. During the summer, Dick has taught college at Northern Illinois in DeKalb, also at a small college in Des Plaines called DeLourdes. The next member of my mother and dad's family was Thomas. Tommy was born September the 23rd, 1906. Tommy, as an infant, was very, very sickly, and no one believed he would live. But he did live to become a Passionist missionary priest, and was proud of the fact that he had conducted over 500 missions. before his death. Through the years, Tommy wound up having only one kidney, he had diabetes, he had a bad heart, and he died in February of 1974. He is buried in the Passionist Monastery grounds in Norwood Park on Harlem Avenue in Talcott. My next brother is Michael. Michael was born December the 8th, 1907. Mike married a Marie DeAndre. They have a fine family of 3 boys. Tom has received his Ph.D. and has been superintendent of schools in several towns. I don't know Tommy's wife, but I understand they have 2 or 3 children. I believe they are now living in Lansing. I'm not sure. Their next boy is Michael. Michael also is a school teacher, married a gal named Carol. I don't know her last name. They have no children. They are both school teachers. The youngest of their 3 boys is David. David was born in either 1941 or 42. In his career, since he got out of college, he has sold. He's been a salesman. He's sold for numerous different companies. I believe he is now in the brokerage business. David got married May the 10th, 1975. Babe and I were not able to be in attendance at that wedding. The next of my brothers was James. I believe James was born in 1909. He died at the age of 6 months from whooping cough. James is buried in the Reardon plot at Mount Carmel Cemetery. Next in line for my folks' family came the only girl, Margaret. Margaret was born March the 25th, 1911. In her younger days, Margaret was quite an amateur entertainer. She could entertain children by the hour with her singing, her card tricks, and various other tricks that she did. Margaret never married. When my dad died in April of 1951, he had willed most of his possessions, including the 2-flat building at 5022 Irving Park Boulevard, to Margaret. Margaret maintained her apartment there for a short time, but my brother Johnny had lived on the first floor with his family. After possibly 2 years, Margaret rented an apartment of her own on the north side of Chicago. In her heyday, Margaret had been a very good secretary. But after my dad died, Margaret became quite irrational. She was never able to hold a job for more than a month or 2 at the most. She would take vacations to California. When she'd get back, she'd take a vacation to Florida, and all we could see was that Margaret was going through her money like nobody's business. While she still had a little left, she had appointed me power of attorney. I was then able to keep Margaret from spending more money than she had. Margaret had a tragic thing happen to her while she had been living in her apartment on the north side. One night she was getting out of a cab and broke her ankle. They had taken her to Augustana Hospital. While there, Margaret developed a mental breakdown. She eventually recovered enough from that to go back to her own apartment. However, a short time later, we had to take her back to Augustana Hospital because she really went wild. The doctors there recommended they send her to St. Luke's Presbyterian, where they had a very good department for mental disorders. After spending some time there, the doctors recommended that Margaret be committed. I had spent hours with various doctors, including a Dr. Garth Smith, very famous psychiatrist. He had traced Margaret's problem back to the point when she was 7 years old. Margaret had suffered encephalitis, sleeping sickness, for only a couple of weeks, but the doctor felt that it did damage her brain. So after many hours of consultation with doctors, the consensus was that Margaret should be committed. I was told that Galesburg was probably the finest of all the mental institutions in the state, and after much effort, I was able to get Margaret assigned to Galesburg. With the money I had been able to salvage from Margaret, we were able to pay all of her bills, the fees at Galesburg, her insurance, her clothes. Margaret's only income had been Social Security, plus the money that we had saved from her spending. Eventually, we ran out of money, and Margaret is now a free ward of the state. She had been transferred from Galesburg to Kewanee, and 2 years ago she was transferred from Kewanee to a town called Geneseo. These are all state institutions. Margaret's health seems good according to the letters I get from the nurse every now and then, but she still winds up out in left field quite often. It doesn't look as though Margaret will ever be well. I failed to mention that a couple of years after my dad died, Margaret sold the family house to my brother Johnny, who is still living at 5022 Irving Park Boulevard. Margaret is now 64 years old. The next member of our family is Joseph. Joseph was born March the 15th, 1913. Joe has spent several years in service during World War II. Right after the war, he married Mary. I don't know Mary's last name. They had no children of their own, but adopted a fine little girl they called Mary Jo. Mary Jo is now married on her own. The baby of my mother and dad's family was John. Johnny was born December the 25th, 1918. Johnny married an Eleanor Hickey. Johnny also spent quite a bit of time in service. His time was all spent in the Philippines, where he received a citation. Johnny and Eleanor have 4 children. There's Patricia, who is now married, Dennis, whom I believe is also married, Denise, and Donald. They still live at 5022 Irving Park Boulevard. That concludes my mother and dad's immediate family. The next member of my grandfather's family was Margaret, known as Maggie. Maggie had been a professional tailor. She did make all of our first communion suits. Maggie was also my godmother. My grandfather died in 1912, and Maggie came to live with us on Irving Park Boulevard for a short time. Maggie had been engaged to be married, but her fiancé was killed with a stone falling from a building. A short time after she came with us, she decided to enter the convent with the Sisters of Mercy. Her name as a nun was Sister Lucina. Maggie enjoyed over 25 years as a Sister of Mercy. She started teaching at Precious Blood Grammar School in Chicago, Resurrection, and finally at St. Catherine of Siena High School in Oak Park. Maggie died from breast cancer. At her death, they allowed us to have a family wake in the hall at St. Catherine of Siena. Maggie died in the early 1940s. She's buried in Mount Carmel with the Sisters of Mercy. The next person in my grandfather's family was Ann, known as Nan. Nan lived to be 17 years old and died from trichinosis, improperly cured pork. Nan is buried in the Powers plot in Calvary. This concludes my grandparents' family, Anthony and Bridget Powers. The next member of my grandfather's family to be detailed is his brother Joe, Uncle Joe. Uncle Joe had been in the coal and wood business. I don't know how many children they had. I only know of 3 girls that Uncle Joe had. There was Margaret, Mame, and Josephine. Margaret, known as Mag, married an attorney from Canada by the name of Jim O'Brien. Jim O'Brien became quite famous in Chicago as a prosecuting attorney. He had 2 nicknames. He always wore a red necktie at his trials, and he had been so successful in his murder convictions they called him Ropes O'Brien. At that time, a convicted murderer was hanged, and Jim O'Brien had quite a number of hangings to his credit. He later became a defense attorney, and one of his most famous cases was his handling of the famous Black Sox. That case came up, I believe, in 1920. The players had been barred from baseball, but Jim was able to keep them from getting convicted and sent to jail. This couple, I believe, had 7 children. I'm not sure of the exact rotation, although I do know the oldest was Mary O'Brien. Mary died from a brain tumor at about 19 years of age. I believe Alice was next. Alice was a school teacher, as were all the O'Brien girls. Alice was married to a Bob Walsh, a tobacco representative. Alice died in 1974. They had no children. I believe James was next. Jimmy was the only boy. Jim, too, became an attorney. He married a Bernice Driscoll. I believe they had 7 children. Jim died at an early age in 1951 from lung cancer. Bernice had been a school teacher also and kept that family together, going back to teaching school, living in Riverside, in the Riverside home they had. A wonderful family. Bernice never remarried. I believe Margaret is next in the O'Brien family. She married a Dr. Jim Tobin. Dr. Tobin was in attendance when my dad died in Elgin at St. Joseph's Hospital. They have no children. I believe Rita O'Brien came next. Rita married an attorney, Louis Citro. They have 5 children. They have a big home in Oak Park and another one in Fox Lake. Rita is still teaching school. I believe Caddy is next. Catherine. Catherine also is still teaching school. Catherine remained unmarried. She does live with the Citros both in Oak Park and in Fox Lake. The baby of their family is Jane Ann. Jane Ann is married to a Dr. Jim Cassidy. Dr. Cassidy is on the staff of Loyola Medical Center. I believe this family lives in Elmhurst. They have 8 children. My mother and dad always felt very close to Mag O'Brien. Through the years, they had played cards together regularly. The next daughter of my Uncle Joe's was Mame. Maine married a Jim Marshall. I believe he was an executive with the gas company. They had 5 children, although they lived on the south side and we were never too close to them. The third daughter of my Uncle Joe's was Josephine. Josie. Josie had been a cashier for years for the CTA, for the elevated lines at various stations. Josie never married. That completes the history I have on Uncle Joe and his family. Next in line was my grandfather's brother, Patrick, known to a lot of people as Patty Poor, son of the Weaver. Patrick, Uncle Pat, lived on the first floor of my grandfather's building. I believe he had 2 children. There was a Catherine, known as Kate, and Jim. Kate married a mailman named Ernie Jers. Kate was a wonderful person and helped me tremendously with my family history. This couple had 3 children, Edward, Renona, and Catherine. They had a home for years on Diversey Parkway in Chicago. After her husband died and the children were all married, Kate lived alone on the second floor. She had quite a problem in that she had arthritis in the knee so bad she used a walker to get around her apartment. The children finally convinced her that she'd be much better off in a nursing home. So Kate went down to Atlanta, where her daughter Catherine lives, and did go into a nursing home. I understand she's doing quite well, and she is a very happy person. She's in her late 80s now. With her daughter Catherine living down there, Kate is able to have visitors quite regularly. This is a fine family. Please turn tape to the other side.